Hey everybody, let's talk about anger. It's very common that people will try to teach that anger can be used as a viable fuel, or that really any emotional stimulation can be used as viable fuel in doing anything. And it's not true. It's not true at all. This is something that's repeated by people who have never really gone into their emotions completely, who've never paid attention to the nature of the mind, the nature of emotion, thought, experience, memory, desire, intention, and who, in their own unwillingness to face the fact of what it is that lies underneath the emotional tumult, not wanting to release it, because there's an addiction to the anger and the story surrounding the anger, they teach that you have to hold on to this anger, that you shouldn't let it go, that you can use it as fuel. The trouble is that anger, as with all other stimulating emotions, are only in the system as a result of an attempt to try to lift off from an inertia. The inertia is typically roughly equal in proportion, in mass, to the capacity of liftoff of the stimulating emotions. Typically, it's a little bit heavier, though. That inertia is dense. So what happens is, because there is a story, there's an identity, there's a framework psychologically, which is inertia, that's being held on to, which will not be let go of. There's a refusal to let go of it. Stimulating emotions like anger or lust or jealousy, wrath, hatred, some form of violence will be used, or there's an attempt to use that to counterbalance that inertia and achieve liftoff. The trouble is that all of those stimulating emotions have a very finite shelf life. It's a very finite fuel source, and they burn up very, very quickly. And once those emotions burn up, that ball of inertia hasn't lost any mass. It's still very much there in its full form. So what happens is it simply ends up crashing back down. And you then have to work up another bout of anger to achieve liftoff of that ball of inertia. And as soon as that fuel burns up, it comes crashing right back down. And there's the cycle. So we have to get over the narrative of emotional addiction, which includes the narrative, which is part of the belief that you have no capacity actually to go beyond the story. The mind itself is inertia. It runs on inertia and angular momentum, which is the stimulating liftoff of emotion. And so the mind, the mechanical mind, the ego, it operates like this: inertia and angular momentum. So when you see that it's just a mechanical thing that has no free will, you lose fascination with it. If you come to the fact of what these emotions are, anger, let's talk about anger in particular, and anger is the same thing as lust. Anger is the same thing as envy. Lust, envy, anger, hatred, procrastination. These are all the same emotion. It's one emotion. It's one force. And it doesn't have the capacity to dissolve the inertia. It couldn't. It doesn't have that capacity. It's only capable of running around on a cycle. There's nothing apart from that that can be done with these emotions. They're useless. They're very, 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 very useless. They're fascinating when you're younger. They're fascinating, these emotions. Lust is fascinating, anger is fascinating, hatred's fascinating, envy is fascinating. These emotions are fascinating when you're younger. When you're not living in the fullness, or at least in a movement toward the ripening of maturity. But if what you actually want is to get out of the cycle of false liftoff only to come crashing back down again, then you have to see that as long as you're operating using inertia and stimulation, there's no possible way of sustaining any kind of flight into orbit. It's not possible. There's another quality intrinsic in the human being, and that is the quality of light, lightness itself, which cannot be activated. You can't even come close to touching it as long as that base of inertia is weighing you down. And the very essence of that inertia is the very function, the identity with the function of memory, thought, time, space, ego itself, desire, which is a past mechanism, regurgitating movement images from the past, addicted to a story that gives us a sense of who we are and what we're doing and what we want and where we're trying to go, which has absolutely nothing to do with the truth of who and what you really are. So the trouble here is that I can articulate the mechanics of this, but unless you're willing to encounter the living truth of who and what you really are, beyond all psychosocial contrivances, there can really only be more resistance that arises. And the more resistance, which is of the nature of inertia, the more anger and other stimulating emotions have to be used in a vain attempt to counteract the weight of that inertia if you want to do anything at all. The other trouble with stimulating emotions is that that repetitive cycle of feeling them over and over and over again is not only exemplary of an unwillingness to face the physics, the mechanics of the mind, and therefore no consciousness, no enlightenment, if you'd forgive my use of that word, is possible, and the repetitive movement of those emotions in that cycle over and over and over again quite literally rots and deteriorates the brain, the heart, the gut, the body as a whole. It's incredibly unhealthy, and it doesn't produce anything good. And even if out of that movement of destructive emotion, even if from that you produce a piece of art, or you painting, writing, it doesn't matter what it is, it will be a corrupt piece of art that may feel cathartic in the moment, but the only people to whom it will appeal in any long-term sense are people who are also addicted to being stuck in that cycle, and it will, in fact, because of the nature of the art that must come out in reaction to the perpetual relationship, not even true relationship, it's a pseudo-relationship, because it's an incomplete relationship, but the only art that can be produced in art in reaction to that cycle of emotion is art that justifies and that cosigns, that excuses living in that cycle. And the people who will be drawn to it and look up to it as a good piece of art are people who are also stuck in that cycle and see no way out, and it ends up actually creating more inertia in their system. If you create art from inertia, that art becomes of the nature of inertia, and everyone who touches it gets weighed down by it, not liberated by it. If you create something from that place of stimulation, all it can do is stimulate others. So whatever you create from that place of stimulation and inertia can only bring about more stimulation and inertia in others. And nobody who's actually of the nature of transcendence will even want to touch it. It will only appeal to those who are already stuck, thus making them more stuck. Even if in the moment they go, wow, that's great, I feel so seen, and all of that. And so in the moment, people love to clap and applaud and adulate and go into all kinds of fanfare in the moment because their emotions are stimulated. That's why after experiencing some service, right, or getting some treatment from some facility or whatever, they urge you to hurry up and, give a review, right, of their product, of their service immediately after. And people in their immediate trance of relaxation go, oh yeah, that was so great, and it was the most amazing thing, and da 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 da. Well, 2 hours later, they're having some adverse reaction, or a day later, or 2 days later. But you already left your review. You can't go back and go, it actually sucked. And people usually don't. They'll begin attributing it to something else. And so because we're so fixated in the short term, people will drink, if there's a poison that has a short-term effect of euphoria and the long-term effect of corrosion, people will drink the poison in the moment and get that euphoria and go, oh my God, this is so great, and then tell everybody else, hey, this is so great, this is so great, this is so great. Because right now, in the moment, it feels good. But the reality is the long-term effect of it is absolutely destructive and painful and conducive of nothing but suffering. And that's the nature of inertia and emotional stimulation, which is thought, emotion, memory, desire, intention, that whole psychic package of circuitous mental movement, habitual, mechanical, repetitive, that just seems to keep coming round and around and around, that you say, I can't control it, my emotions, my brain is assaulting me all the time, my thoughts are attacking me, my emotions are attacking me, and I can't stop it. And so you end up going to drugs or drink or psychiatric medication to try to kill the symptoms. And that's because you're holding on to that inertia. You're holding on to identity with time, space, body, mind. You haven't realized that that's not what you are, but the entire psychosocial structure tells you that is what you are. There's no social institution that's willing to release you from that lie, from that trap. Every single social institution, from religion to the so-called scientific establishment, the academic establishment, psychological, philosophical, military, industrial, economic, family, marriage, every single social institution, bar none, the legal system, the bureaucratic system, which demands that you see yourself truly as being the name that is on your identification. You are that person, you are that race, you are that weight, you are that gender, that sex, you are this thing with this story and these credentials and this history, right? And this credit score and blah, blah, blah. And that's you, and if you insist that's not you, you're crazy. So literally the entire system, the entire structure of this so-called civilization in which we live is literally designed to keep you in inertia, consciously and unconsciously. It doesn't make a damn bit of difference. The origin is the same, the ending is the same. It doesn't matter whether you want to call the middle part malevolence or stupidity. It has the same origin and the same effect. And it follows the same pathway through the body. So it doesn't make a difference. It's purposeless to try to tease that out. That's just another psychological distraction because it has the exact same effect. That's all that matters. Same origin, same biological pathway, same end result. For all intents and purposes, it's the exact same thing. So when you see the utter futility, not only of trying to use that kind of emotional stimulation to get this inertia off the ground, which will inevitably come crashing back down, because that emotional stimulation does not have the capacity to whittle away and dissolve that ball of inertia. It has to be dropped. It has to be let go. And finally, you let it go if you're willing to inquire into the nature of it and see that not only is it not helpful, but it isn't even an accurate reflection of who and what you really are. It has no capacity to help you. None. 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 Absolutely none whatsoever. The sanest thing you can do is come to peace. Really peace, not suppression. That's not peace. To come to genuine peace in your body, in your nervous system, which you cannot do as long as you want to resolve the mind, to fix the mind. That means to fix the story, to tell a different story, to get revenge, which you may call justice, to make somebody pay, which is all a part of the resolution of story. As long as you're trying to find some resolution to the story of wounding, trauma, suffering, violence, you won't find it. You won't find it. You will not find it. As long as you're looking for validation, you will only find invalidation. That's the nature of the psyche. So what has to happen is not psychologizing or philosophizing about what to do or what not to do. That's completely irrelevant and quite stupid, if you don't mind me saying so. Hope you don't. What's necessary is coming into direct contact with the physics of the mind. Psychology is obsolete, so is philosophy. So is theology, for that matter. The only thing that you can know, first and foremost, is the physics of the mind. Not theories about the mind, not speculations, not notions, not beliefs. There is a definite 100% and absolute physics to the mind, to the psyche. And you can know it or you can ignore it. And you know it only through your willingness to experience it directly through immediate contact with it. This is the beginning of consciousness. And as long as you're afraid of hurting and of suffering and of pain, which means really to be afraid of the very anger that you're trying to use as a lift-off mechanism, you see? And so there's always, even though you're trying to use the anger and make an apologia for it, make an excuse for it, rationalize it as some kind of jet fuel, even though you're desperately trying to philosophize that into reality, which you can't, you're still afraid of the very thing that you're trying to philosophize into acceptability as a practical source of fuel, which it isn't. And in so doing, even though you might react and go, well, that's because they taught me to be ashamed of my anger. That is beside the point. Of course there's shame with anger. Shame and anger are the same emotion. They go together. There's always shame under anger. That's a fact. But if you look at the physics of it, which you can't do as long as you're afraid, because you're afraid of your shame too, and you're afraid of guilt, and you're afraid of suffering, and you're afraid of everything. And because you're afraid, which finally is not because of any other reason than that you are afraid. You can't go around in circles forever. I'm afraid of anger because they taught me to be ashamed about it. Okay, well, who taught you to be afraid of shame? Well, they did. Okay, well, who taught you to be afraid of fear? They did. All right. And what are you going to do with that? You're afraid of everything. You're afraid of yourself too. So you can go around in that circle over and over and over again, but as long as you're afraid, you cannot touch it. You cannot look at it. The only way through anger, guilt, shame, fear is to look at them, to come into direct contact with them, which you won't do as long as you're afraid of hurting, because to face those emotions hurts. And if you're afraid of hurting, you won't face them. And then you'll just keep going round and around and around. And if that's your choice, that's your prerogative. The trouble is, and everybody has to go through a period of that, to some degree or another. Some people go through one cycle and they leave it behind forever. Some people go through years and years of cycle until they finally leave it behind. The trouble is that when this kind of speech begins to happen, which opens up a possibility of release, the people who are not ready for release get angry and say, well, this isn't fair and this doesn't seem right, and how can you say these things because I'm hurting and I'm suffering and the way you're talking makes me feel ashamed. It's the shame is being brought up because you have to face the shame. That's what spiritual work is. That's what true psychological maturity is. That's what genuine psychological work is, whether you call it light work or shadow work. Please don't be silly and parse hairs here, because in order to do the light work, so to speak, you have to do shadow work. You can't, there's literally, you can't separate the two. You can't. So please drop the bullshit where in the so-called spiritual community, people like to divide the light work from the shadow work. It's the same fucking work. What the fuck are you illuminating if not the shadow? You think that light work means you're illuminating the light? The light doesn't need illumined. The light is already illumined. Light is self-illumined. Light is to light the dark, not to light the light. You don't need a candle when the sun is out. You don't need a torch when the sun is out. You need a torch when you walk into the darkness. Light work and shadow work is the same work. It's the exact same work. I'm gonna say fucking work. I'm watching my mouth. Ugh, not so much though. Flow. So, if you're willing to face the physics of it and the fact of it, and to finish the last point, if you're not ready to actually do the work, one, please stop talking about it as if you're doing it. Because you're lying to yourself, you're lying to the world. Also, if you're not willing or ready to do the work yet, I understand. You're under no obligation to, but you have zero right to tell anybody else not to do it, and you have zero right to try to silence this kind of a space that is being opened up to give people the opportunity who are ready to step through. Just because you're not ready and you feel ashamed of not being ready, you have no right to try to block anybody else from walking through the door. This is called responsibility. And people that get angry at this kind of speech, that don't want other people to go through because they're not ready to go through, they typically have a self-philosophy of being a very just and responsible person, or a good person, or however they try to cover up the unprocessed emotion, because there's shame. If you don't feel ashamed of yourself, you don't need to have an image of yourself as a good person. What a stupid thing. It's stupid to see yourself as either a good or a bad person. It's stupid. You only need to have an image of yourself as a good person, or even an enlightened person, if you're trying to counteract some inertial force of shame. If you're here without shame, you don't need an image of yourself, either good or bad. It's stupid. It's stupid to indulge in, I'm a bad person. That's the inertia talking. And to go, I'm a good person, that's still the inertia talking. That's the stimulation trying to move away from the inertia, which it can't. You can't get rid of the inertia by doing positive affirmations or even negative affirmations. Repeating any kind of process mentally, psychologically, has literally zero power whatsoever, at all, to do away with the inertia. It's not possible. Those are all stupid psychological tricks that don't work, which keep you coming around and around and around, which is how all the dickwads make money off of you and off of everybody. That's why there's a massive self-help industry. It's a pyramid scheme because no one fucking heals. Why don't you heal? Because all they're doing is stimulating you and letting you drop. Stimulating you and letting you drop. So what's being offered here in this moment right now, this isn't a service, I'm not advertising anything. Sometime in the future, as things pick up on this channel, and there may be sessions or whatever, we may end up going into that kind of workspace. But right here, right now, this is just you and me, and I'm pointing out to a living portal that's right here in front of you that you have the capacity to walk through if you choose to. And it's not pretty. It ends up being pretty, but you have to feel the pain. You can't get out of hell without feeling the same pain that you felt entering into hell. That's how you get out of hell. And that's why very few people ever get out of hell. Because you have to feel the exact same suffering and pain that you felt entering into hell. And most people would rather just drug themselves and numb themselves or chase pleasure endlessly in order to avoid the pain. But you have to feel the totality of the pain from beginning to the end all at once. Otherwise, you're stuck. You're stuck. That avoidance of feeling the pain is itself the avoidance of coming up to the shame, to the anger, to the guilt, to the fear, and facing the mechanism of it so that you actually understand it. Otherwise, you're just superstitious about it. And most people are superstitious about the mind, about emotions, about thought, about desire, about intention, about history, about identity. Superstitious. And being superstitious about this does not help you. You have to approach the reality of it, and you have to face and feel the physics. And I understand that it feels like dying. That's what it is. You are dying. the false self, that self that is constructed of all of that identity with the inertia and the stimulating emotion, with the story, that self has to die. And it will feel like a death in the body because the body is neurologically identified with that structure of memory and thought and story and emotion, which is all lodged in the nervous system and in the body. Of course it feels like death. Of course it feels overwhelming. It's the most overwhelming thing you'll ever feel in your life. The work is real. Spiritual work is real. Moving from darkness to light is real. Moving from untruth to truth is real. And it takes everything. You will feel crushed, and you will have you'll be in a feeling of total unpredictability where you have no idea what's going to happen afterwards. You have no idea what the process is going to lead you to. You don't have any way of knowing. And so that movement of repetitive inertia, pseudo-stimulation, liftoff, and then crashing back down that repeats over and over again in that mechanical cycle, as much as it fucking sucks to be trapped in that, it's predictable. But when you step into the total unpredictability of freedom, which is where you step into when you're willing to feel and go through this process of true purgation, you have no idea where the hell it's going to lead your life. You have no idea. You have no idea. All of your relationships could fall apart with your family, with your friends, with your spouse, with your partner, with your job, with your community, with your religion, with your spiritual group. Your whole system of relationship will fall apart. You can expect it. Why? Because they're all based on you being in this repetitive cycle of inertia and stimulation. But when you break that, you're no longer a predictable moving part in the machine of the structures of your life. And if you're living in this kind of repetitive inertia cycle, guess what? So is everybody else around you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to fit in with them. A free being doesn't fit in anywhere. A free being belongs everywhere and nowhere. You can be anywhere because you can take any shape and any form that you need, but you don't actually fit in anywhere because you have no definite shape any longer. It's only when you're here as a ball of inertia and stimulation, moving in this repetitive track on a storyline, that you have a definite shape. And it's only with a definite shape that you can fit into a space where everybody else is operating as a definite shape. So the inertia compounds itself by the fact of fitting into a larger schemata of inertia and stimulation, which psychologically looks like it fits in everybody's stories, kind of, whether they clash a little bit or they have parallels and they intersect, and it's a gross intersection of just lies, of inertia stimulation, of violence. And you can't get out. This is why when you step into reality, you have to go alone. You have to go alone. This is why you're always told, you have to go alone. And when people are waking up, going through their enlightenment or their so-called ascension process, what you really mean by that is how long it takes you to be willing to actually relinquish that garbage. And as long as you're stuck in dynamics with other people, you won't. This is why you come across all this information and why you yourself, if you're still here with me, have experienced, whether it's years or months, it doesn't matter how long, a lifetime, whatever the extent is and whatever degree of isolation. Because you, or something larger than you, which is the true self, you're being set up to break out of the cycle of inertia. And you cannot do that as long as you're addicted to being a part of other people's storylines. It doesn't work. As long as you're addicted to being a part of any storyline, it doesn't work. Because the very inertia itself is identification with a particular storyline, with the past. The past is inertia. The mind is inertia in that sense. So the mind is both inertia as well as the generative force of that stimulation, which tries to get that inertia off the ground. And if you see what that means in terms of the physics of the mind, because the mind itself is both the source of inertia and the stimulation trying to lift off or move away from that inertia, it can never generate more force than what itself is. And so therefore it can only lift up to a certain degree and then come back down. The mind doesn't have the capacity to achieve critical mass beyond itself. It just comes up and then down, up and down, up and down, in that repetitive cycle over and over again. The mind cannot go beyond itself. It's not possible. It's not possible. The mind cannot transcend itself. You cannot use thought to get out of the mind. You can use thought or the intellect to come right up to the edge of the mind, but then to go beyond the edge of the mind, you have to go beyond the intellect, which is the same thing as going beyond the mind. So what I've just said effectively is, to go beyond the mind, you have to go beyond the mind, which, again, you see how that appears as a loop? Because the mind is only capable of looping. The mind. Thought, emotion, desire, intention, fear, shame, guilt, anger is only capable of looping. That's all it can do, and it will loop until you die. That's the trap. The mind will loop until the body fucking dies. So the moment you see that, you see you're in a goddamn trap. And you can justify and say, well, everyone else is in the trap. Okay. Well, these people are suffering and those people are suffering. Okay. There's no excuse. Co-opting somebody else's story of suffering to justify while you're going to stay stuck in suffering, that's violence. It's, if we're going to use the words that I used earlier, it's malicious, it's evil, and it's stupid. It's the same thing. Don't take it personally. That's part of the trouble, is you take things personally. It's not personal. The mind is not personal. That's a very hard thing to accept, because the mind feels so personal. In fact, you want it to be personal. It's my mind, my story, my suffering, my trauma, my pain, mine. That is the disease right there. You say you hate the suffering and you hate the trauma and you hate the pain and you hate the inertia and you hate the people that did this to you. Well, if you really did, if you really did, actually, you'd be liberated from it. But the fact is, you like being able to say, this is my mind and my suffering and my pain, and you don't know and you can't understand, and how dare you tell me. You see, you like that. And that's why you stay stuck here. You like it. Everyone likes it. If they didn't, they wouldn't be there. That's what they prefer. It's safer. Because it's predictable. You know what's coming. Yes, it's full of ups and downs, and you complain about it, but you feel comfortable in it because you can predict it. The other thing you can't predict. And when you come close to that unpredictable unknown, you feel that you will never be the same again once you step into it. You'll lose all of your identity. You'll lose your gender identity, your racial identity, your sexual identity. You'll lose your cultural identity, your religious identity, your occupational identity, your family identity. You will lose all identity, including your identity as being a human. Because when you say, oh, I'm just a human, you mean something terrible by that. You lose all identity. Even if you start building up some kind of spiritual identity, which is meant to be a counteracting force against the inertia. And has it gotten you off the ground? No amount of counteractive psychological force could ever be strong enough to get that inertia up into orbit. It's not possible. It's not possible. And if it were possible, if you were able to summon up the juju to do so, which actually would require stealing other people's energy, which is exactly what most people do, steal other people's energy, because the movement of stimulation of your own mind is never strong enough to get its own inertia up into orbit. So in fact, it is possible to get the inertia up into orbit, but only if you steal literally buckets of other people's fucking energy, which just puts them into a deeper space of inertia, because now they have no even stimulating factor to be able to move or think. That's black, it's dark magic, it's dark sorcery. What the fuck do you think this world is running on in terms of the economics and the politics and the legal system and the bureaucracy and the establishments? That's what they do. That's what the plantation is in which we live. It's an energy siphoning situation. So that they can get their inertia up into orbit. But even then, it has to be sustained by continuing to siphon other people's energy. Because the minute you stop siphoning other people's energy, boom, that shit comes crashing back down. It's not sustainable. Fucking around with inertia and stimulation is not sustainable. It's not sustainable. In any fucking way is it sustainable. It only breeds death and destruction and disease in every single way. There is zero benefit to it whatsoever. Zero. Zero. And this fact has to be faced without sentimentality, without nostalgia, without romance. It's a fact. And it requires that you feel the shame that the whole system of stimulation inertia is literally designed to avoid. It's a shame avoidant system. You can call it narcissism, borderline personality, depression, anxiety, blee, blah, blue. It doesn't fucking matter what you call it. It's the same fucking shit. And clinicalizing it, identifying with it, and then medicating for it, it doesn't fucking help. It just keeps the shit in there. You have to get it out. And it fucking hurts. There's no way to avoid that fact. I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry because you have to feel that hurt. That's what makes you a human being. Otherwise, you just go back to sleep and you just fucking diddle people and you fuck with people and you steal their energy and you use and abuse them because you've never actually gone through the deep feeling of that pain in the truest sense to actually wake you the fuck up. Out of being addicted to the story of inertia, which can only keep you locked in other people's timelines of inertia and stimulation where you're mutually using and abusing each other and then calling it love, which is fucking stupid and evil. So you want to be free or you don't want to be free? That's the question. It's no more complicated than that. It's that simple. You want to be free or you don't want to be free. Very, very simple. If you don't want to be free, that's your business, that's your choice, but you have no fucking right to try to prevent anybody else from being free because you can't face your shame and your guilt and your anger and your fear. You don't have the right to hold anybody else back because you don't want to make the leap. If you don't want to make the leap, that's cool, but get the hell out of the way. Get out of the way. If you belong on the sidelines, get to the fucking sidelines. Clear the space so the people who actually want to jump through can jump through. That's all. That's all. If you stay in the wrong place long enough, the cosmos, the universe, God, intelligence, love, has a way of moving you out. So as a human being, you can either consciously make the choice to come to this reality, or nature will correct you. And when you leave it to nature to do it, when you leave it to the universe to do it because you won't consciously take the process into your hands, well, that shit usually doesn't end very fucking well. It usually just compounds the pain because it ends up reinforcing the narrative of God hates me, the universe hates me, life hates me, people hate me, all of that. But you hate you, you hate God, you hate the universe, you hate life. Not really, not deeply, you're in love. But the inertia covers that up. And so the story of inertia is always a story of hatred. There's no inertia without hatred, without anger, without envy, without lust, without all of that. Avoidance, it's the same thing. So if you actually finally see this, you see what a futile, useless thing it is. You drop it. It drops you. It's a mutual drop-in. It's a mutual unclinging. It's a mutual unhinging. It's a mutual letting go. But a total letting go, an actual letting go. And it feels like no fear of fear, no fear of the dark, no fear of anything, no fear of death. Because the process of death is what you have to go through. So what happens when you see the futility of this and you stop playing the game? What really happens? Well, one, you have to watch the cycle of it, which means you have to feel the pain of it, because it's not just your suffering, it's the suffering of the whole world, because everybody is stuck in this trap, literally everybody. This is actually what's meant by the Matrix, the Maya, people who are avoidant of the fact love to make it about, whatever the fuck stupid shit they want to make it about. Believing in the conventional narrative of history, and you really have to come believe this other narrative of history, and the aliens, and the flat, all stupid shit. That's not what the fuck the Matrix is. That's not what it is. At all. The illusion is the cycle of fucking inertia and stimulation that keeps you trapped in hell. That's the trap. That's the trouble. The beauty and the trouble, and you have to face the fucking reality. You have to face the reality. If you don't face the reality, you stay stuck. And facing the reality is not simply a conceptual facing of the reality. You have to feel it. You have to feel every last ounce and drop of suffering. There's no way to avoid that fact at all. You have to feel it completely. And then feeling it completely, you see there's no such thing as my suffering. There's just suffering. Thought is thought. Emotion is emotion. It's not my thought or my emotion or my anything, or your thought or your suffering or your trauma. It's trauma. It's emotion. It's violence. It's suffering. And it's been here since the mind has been here. It's been here since the beginning of time, humanly. Since the first human ancestor picked up and started using the first tool, which is millions of years ago. This force of inertia has been with us. It's an old, ancient addiction. It's an ancient habit. It's an ancient habit. Ancient habit. It's very ingrained into the brain, into the nervous system. It runs that deep. But it doesn't run that deep, because if you actually step back, it's a speck of dust in the fucking wind. When you discover what's really here, beyond the mind, it's nothing. It's nothing. And that's true liftoff. That's when you float. That's when you fly. Because there's nothing left to contend with. Nothing's personal anymore. Nothing is personal anymore. Nothing. Not love, not hate. Nothing. And the ego, that inertia, that story which feels pitiful and besotten and just, anger and hatred and nobody loves me and I can't love and, it's just so gross, that. And you want to counter that with the hope of one day I'll love, or one day somebody will love me, and so I have to keep holding on to the hope of a story of romance and sentimentality and satisfaction and pleasure and warmth, and one day somebody will come along and appreciate me, and it's so disgusting. I understand it. But if you step back and look at it, clearly you see it's disgusting. It's terrible. It's violent. Not only for you, but for whatever unfortunate soul you're going to sick that on, and then call it love. It's foul. And that's the game of the world. That's what people are doing to one another. Sicking their sickness onto one another, and then calling it love. It's not love, it's violence. Love is not personal. You're blessed with the capacity to have a personal experience, but if you're not aware that that personal experience is just an experience, as beautiful as it may be, and it should be beautiful, but if you are unaware of the impersonal and indeed transpersonal intelligence that is the living reality of love, which is not an emotion or a thought or a memory or an experience itself. There can be experiences within that field of love, which is the mind itself is just an experience. Love is what is. No strings attached. Love is not personal. Compassion is not personal. Peace is not personal. Wisdom, God, truth is not personal. When the mind takes it and co-opts it, it makes it personal. And the mind does take and co-opt everything. That's what it does. The only trouble is if you believe in the story of the mind. The minute you create an image of love in the mind, then you have to get it, and you have to keep it, and you have to prevent it from being lost. But it will be lost. Everything will be lost. Everything. That's a fact. You can't keep anything. Everything will be lost. Everything. So if you can really sit with that and face that fact, then there's an opportunity to tell the truth about the nature of the cycle, the stupidity of it, the malevolence of it, the violence of it, the suffering of it, and to not shy away from it. Because you have the capacity to bear it, to feel it. And it will crush you. It will leave you on the floor. It will. Crying and laughing and yes, it crushes you. That's a fact. And you do have to go through that ordeal of death inwardly. You have to. There's no avoidance of that. And if you don't do it, you'll just end up killing your body, whether slowly or quickly. Because the ego, which is inertia, is constantly asking for death. And it either gives it to itself slowly or quickly, while pretending it wants to live, but it doesn't really want to live. It does and it doesn't. It doesn't really want to live. It wants to stay alive, but it doesn't want to live, and it doesn't even really want to stay alive. It's pulling itself in multiple different directions, hence the nature of inertia, which is pulling down, and the stimulation, which is trying to pull up. It's like a helicopter pulling itself in multiple directions at once, barely holding on by a fucking thread. It's insane. It's unsustainable. That's the nature of the mind. When you see it completely, it loses its fascination. You're not glamorized by it anymore. It doesn't fascinate you anymore. You're not seduced by the mind anymore. Because all seduction comes from the mind. And seduction is a kind of dark sorcery. It's a kind of black magic. What do you need to seduce anything for? What do you need to be seduced for? If you're just playing a game, seduction is a cute little game. The mind is a game, which you're completely willing to put down and not take seriously in that ultimate sense of pretending it's real and you have to kill for it. Fine. The trouble is you don't have that capacity yet, or you try to, but how does it go? Until you finally see that the mind is not real, you're stuck in it, and you believe the story. And the minute you believe the story of the mind, you suffer. There's no getting out of that fact. It's 100% irrevocable. So when you finally see that it's not real, that it's not true, and you and the mind mutually relinquish one another, what remains is this nameless, omnipresent light. This incredible light, which has no beginning and no end, which is because it's not of the mind. It's not the product of a story. Inertia and stimulation is part of a story. Without a story, that doesn't exist. But this light that is here and omnipresent exists without a story. It has to, it must. It's not of the nature of inertia, or time, or stimulation. It is itself love. It is itself peace. It is itself of the nature of ecstasy. But even deeper than that ecstasy, peace, peace, true peace, true stillness, true stillness. And in the stillness, there's no string attached, and there's no compulsion to follow any predetermined direction. You can turn on a dime and face any angle and go in that direction, and then immediately turn on the dime and face any other angle and go in that direction. You become like a spaceship instead of like an airplane, right? An airplane can only take off in one direction, and it's using inertia and angular momentum, and so it can only go in one direction, and it has to kind of move by its nose like that. Even a helicopter can only go in the direction its nose is facing. It might be able to turn around, but still. When you see images of flying saucers and spaceships, right, how does that shit work? It floats up, right? It's just a disc, and then it hovers there in the air, impossibly, right? This isn't about believing or not believing. That's not the point. I'm using this because it's a very, very perfect metaphor, analogy. The flying saucer is there as a discus in the sky, and it can hover, defying physics. And then all of a sudden, it can literally move. It's like a Wonkavator, right? When Willy Wonka pushes that final button at the end. I haven't seen the new one, but the Timothy Chalamet one. I'm sure it's fine. But the old one with Gene Wilder, where at the very end, he and Charlie, they're in the Wonkavator, and he's never pushed that red button before, and he pushes it, and it bursts out through the building. But every other button in the elevator takes you to some predetermined path in the building. It might be long ways and down ways and up ways and sideways and in ways and out ways, but it's still a predetermined path. Only when he hit that final button did it break out of all predetermined path. Well, that's what we're talking about. That's what this light is that I'm speaking of. It's an entire field of eternal intelligence that has no predetermined path whatsoever. Inertia and stimulation follow a predetermined path, but not this. And so it's like the flying saucer, where it can rise up, it can land, cool. It's an object. If there's a bottom surface, it can land on it. And if there's no upper limit, boop, it could just sit up here and float in space. And then it can go literally any direction and stop on a dime and move anywhere. It's totally free in its movement. That's what we're speaking of, and that's what the human being's unique station in this cosmos is. You are like a flying saucer in that sense. You are. This vehicle if you want people talk about vimanas, that's what this body is. Flying saucer, that's what this body is. This body is the flying saucer. This body is the Vimana. This body is the Merkaba. This body is the enlightenment vehicle. It's not obligated to follow a predetermined direction like that. It will, and it does in over 99% of people, because they're sitting here going along this cycle of inertia and stimulation, which just keeps you going like this. Each time decaying and rotting the brain and the body more and more and more. But if you're willing to go through that process of death, spiritually, psychically, psychologically, emotionally, willing to go through that process of death, which feels like a total moving away from the known, everything you know, completely. Not knowing what the hell's going to happen. If you're willing to take that risk, which costs your life, it's not like you're just risking a few dollars or a weekend. You're risking your life. That's what enlightenment or awakening or transcending or ascending or whatever nonsense word people use to refer to the fact of simply being human in reality. You risk your life to be human. Love costs life. Life costs life. Not a few dollars, not a weekend, not an hour. Life. It's your life. You pay for truth with your life. You pay for love with your life. You give your life to it. You give your whole life to truth. You give your whole life to grace. You give your whole life to love. You give your whole life to God, to nature, to the universe. You give your whole life to it. No holds barred. And then whatever nature brings you, whatever God brings you, that's it. It means you surrender completely. What kind of partner am I going to have? It doesn't, none of that matters. Where am I going to live? Where am I going to go? What kind of job am I going to have? How am I going to support? It doesn't fucking matter. None of that matters. It'll happen. And if you die, you die. It's okay. It's fine, finally. Which is not an admonition to take yourself out physically. No, it's not necessary at all. This body is going to die. That's a fact. It's not avoidable. Everybody is going to die. So if you can face that fact and really step into the clarity of that, into the unknown of love, of life, and of death, what you discover is that love, life, and death are one. And that what you are, as it turns out, is that light that has no beginning and no end. That light which is not separate from the darkness, the true darkness, which is the darkness upon the face of the deep. That is the very darkness of eternity itself, which, as it turns out, is a great light. The darkness that's the opposite of light, that's all the mind. That's thought. That's the ego. That's inertia. The light that is the opposite of dark is not light, it's dark. In the sense of contrived, gnarled, inertia, malevolent, stupid. The true light and the true dark are one and the same. And you can just call it the light with the capital L, it's fine. It doesn't matter finally what you call it, but it is light. It is true light. And you only discover this light by walking straight into the darkness. Light is no, as I said, what good is a torch in broad daylight? What good is a torch in broad daylight? A torch only serves you in the darkness. A lighthouse is not necessary during the day. A lighthouse is for sailors to guide sailors to the shores at night. So, stepping into this is completely necessary. And if you're even still here with me right now, this is clearly you're doing it. You're going through it. Obviously, you're doing it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't stay. This wouldn't interest you. You wouldn't even be able to hear what I'm saying. However it feels is completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter how it feels in terms of that being an indicator of efficacy or not. It may be uncomfortable. You may be soaring sky high right now. Or you may be going, oh, you're right, but fuck. Wherever you fall, it doesn't matter. It's not a judgment on your ability or your character or your capacity to do the work. If you're here with me, you're doing the work. If you can sit here with this and hear all this and go with me step by step as we're moving through this together, then you're doing the work, however it feels, whether it's uncomfortable or whether you're soaring in ecstasy or chilled out on the floor. I mean, it doesn't make a difference. How, in terms of appearance, you may be processing or where you may be at in your stage of allowing everything to move through. But the real thing, it happens like that. It happens in an instant. It may take, some people delay it because they don't want to let go, but the real thing happens like that. And it's a mutual letting go. And it only happens when you see the reality of the inefficacy of that whole movement of inertia and angular momentum. And when you're here, when you realize this light that has no beginning and no end, you're not obligated. There's no obligation, no compulsion to follow any predetermined track. all following of predetermined track is violence. So here you are. Here you are. Now go live your life. You can do whatever the hell. From this point, what can't you do? And being here in this love, you see, oh, it doesn't help. The anger, one of the excuses for holding on the anger is somebody's abusive and I have to tell them what for. All that does is feed their abuse. There's nothing more powerful than being in the still, calm, cool, chill nature of peace and saying, no, stop, get out of the way, and meaning it, and not moving from peace, not moving from truth, not moving from love, not moving from the clarity. You only resort to anger when you feel that you won't be listened to, and so you've got to make a point so that they listen to you and they know you mean business. Ugh, that's not how you get anything done. That reeks of fear and powerlessness, not power. It's an artifice of power. It's not true power. Violence is not true power. Anger is not true power. Emotion is not true power. There's nothing wrong with emotion. Emotion is a beautiful thing to express. But it is not true power. Neither is thought. The mind, the whole mind, is not true power. It's not true power. It's an illusion of power. It's not true power. To really be in power, so to speak, in the deepest sense of that, which is really going back to the source of all power, is to be here in this light, which is not personal and it's totally unperturbed. That's why you can stay in it. If it were a personal quality of being unperturbed, you would die. You would be perturbed all the time. You can't be personally unperturbed. The person is always perturbed. The person is perturbation. That's the fact. But the eternal light of being is not a person. It's not a thing. And you can't even really call it an entity. You can't really call God an entity. Because there's nothing. God is not separate from anything, and nothing is separate from God. It's not an entity. It's a living intelligence. It's all that exists. It's not separate from you. You are that. It is you. And when you see this, and you can look at it again and again and again and again, and every time you look at it, you see it could only be this forever and ever. And even if the mind goes, no, something else could happen, okay, you stop and you look again. And you look again and again. You look as many times as you need. Look over and over and over again, every second of your life. And it reveals the same thing. That it's eternal, but every time you look, it's fresh. So you can't make it never gets old. You can't make an image out of it. It's eternally free and alive. And you see that in that, you can't make an image of yourself either, because any image you make of yourself, or of anybody, or of the world is false. And so every ego is stupid, and every ego is the same ego, and it's stupid. Anger is stupid. Jealousy is stupid. It's stupid. Envy is stupid. Lust is stupid. It's stupid. Avoidance is stupid. It's stupid. It's stupid. The mind is stupid. And that's not a judgment, it's a fact. The mind is stupid. And if you can actually see that, and how you've identified with it, and therefore you've identified with stupid, and therefore you've behaved stupidly, if you see the stupidity of stupidity, you laugh and you cry. But if you're still avoiding shame and going, no, I can't be stupid, I'm not stupid, you're stupid, then you see that's staying in it. That's what stupidity is stupid because it doesn't realize its own stupidity. Because it can't feel the shame, it can't feel the embarrassment of not being good enough. That's what the ego is, it's not good enough. That's what inertia is, not good enough. Fear, no love. And the only way out is to feel it completely. So you feel it. You feel it. If you're willing to walk through completely and out the other side, you dissolve. When you cross that barrier, you burn up in the fire. You burn up in the fire. That's what that hellfire is there for. You burn up in it. And if you let yourself burn up in it, it takes nothing more than a moment. And then you're nothing. And as nothing, boom, you can cross that threshold. But really, in the moment of truly becoming nothing, or realizing that you are nothing and you've always been nothing and everybody and everything is nothing, in that moment of the realization of nothingness, you're already free, you're already here without any transition from one place to another. It's a spontaneous boom. And it's not, it's quicker than that. I mean, there isn't even there's no time-based transition. It's simply as soon as the nothingness is realized, you see that the nothingness was always here and you were never actually even in hell in the first place. Because there is no hell. It's an illusion that appears, but as long as you believe in it, you suffer. And you see everyone walking around suffering because they believe in a bullshit story that has no existential basis in reality. But if you want to look for proof of the reality of that story, it's all around you. The illusion of hell itself is the storybook proof of the reality of hell. So unless you have the capacity, the willingness to get still and feel everything and face it, you can't see through the illusion. And then you'll just get caught in some story about needing to switch timelines, needing to manifest a better life, by trying to psychologically reprogram yourself against your conditioning, which can't happen. There has to first be a total cleansing of conditioning. Otherwise, you just stay stuck recycling the same conditioning. You can't reprogram the mind with the mind. It doesn't work. It's not possible. You stay in the same shit. So, finally, if you're really willing to stop and feel and see, look, then you discover something here which has never been touched by time, by thought, by anger, by hatred, by violence, by suffering, by trauma. And this is the truth of who and what you really are, eternally untouched. And then you're no longer obligated to fulfill the role of any story or any identity. You can play whatever identity game you want, but then you can drop it the moment you're done with it, thank God. Anything else is hell. And then in the tranquility, in the calmness, in the chill, in the resting, in peace, in wisdom, in truth, you can tell the truth. With your whole body, mind, heart, soul, you can tell the truth without needing violence. You only need violence to say what you feel because you're afraid of what you feel and you're afraid of people's reaction to what you feel. But when you're here in truth, in peace, there's no fear of anybody's reaction. They may react so badly they try to kill me. Okay, we'll see what happens. Some people may worship you, some people may hate you. Okay, we'll see what happens. Flattery and insult mean nothing. Nothing. It's all ego. Who cares? You can flatter me, you can insult me. That's your problem. It doesn't have anything to do with me. The only thing you can see when you see me is yourself. And if yourself is still that inertia, stimulation, that ego, then you'll look at me only through that lens of your ego, and so you'll only see your own ego on me. But if you're standing here and you're clear, and you're in consciousness, then you'll look at me and see pure consciousness. What you see when you look at me is a reflection of you. Has nothing to do with me at all. That's a truth. It's a universal truth. It's a fact. Whatever you see when you look at me is you. So that's an indicator. What do you see? because you're looking at yourself. Always. You're only ever looking at yourself, and you're only ever talking to yourself. You are only ever looking at yourself, and you're only ever talking to yourself. So there's nothing to fear. And the sooner you realize this, the better. Because otherwise, if you wake up, I don't want to say too late, it's never too late to wake up, but you'll experience that, oh, fuck, I wasted however many years of my life. Yeah, that's the fucking feeling. That's why it sucks. That's why people don't wake up. Because they don't want to go, oh, fuck, I wasted the last 5 years or 10 years or 20, 25, 50, 60 years. And then that triggers the whole shame mechanism, which the ego is literally made of shame, trying to avoid itself. That's why it splits itself. That's what split attention is. Divided attention is avoidance. It doesn't matter whether you call it ADD or bipolar or whatever the fuck. It's the same thing. It's a tactic of mind to avoid the self, to avoid shame, to avoid fear, to avoid pain, to avoid suffering, to avoid boredom, to avoid loneliness, and to seek some kind of pleasure, stimulation, distraction. Why? Because you can't tell the fucking truth. And it may come out as you having to tell the people around you to fuck off. You may have to tell your family to fuck off. You may have to tell your spouse to fuck off. You may have to tell your kids to fuck off. You may have to tell your friends and your boss and your coworker and society and your pastor or your imam or your priest. You might have to tell them to fuck off. Of course, if you have small children, that's not what we're talking about. I'm not telling you have them. You've got to take care of them. That's your karma. That's your path. And really what you discover is that whatever and whoever is around you, that's your path. But first, inwardly, you have to tell everyone to fuck off. And not in the violent sense. It doesn't come from violence. No violence. It's a fuck off, in a sense of if somebody's violent and abusive and exploitative to you, and you're caught in that pattern with them, rather than react against it and fight and go into that old drama again, it's just, hey, knock it off. Stop it. I'm not playing this. I'm not going to do this with you. I'm not doing this. I'm not going to react to you. I'm not going to meet you in anger and guilt and shame and fear and yelling and screaming and fighting. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And to simply remain in this peace, those who are living in this, they'll either surrender to that peace, however long it takes, or they'll run, or they'll try to, but they reveal what they are in that moment. When you live in this peace, in this love, in this joy, in this truth, everything is revealed to be what it is in the moment. And don't try to artificially feel anything. It's not the point. But in this peace is like the ultimate exorcist. It reveals the truth about who and what is in front of you, always. The trouble is, people get afraid of having to act accordingly. Because what if somebody who you are addicted to in your story, and who is addicted to you as an image in their story, is affronted by the fact that they are no longer going to be able to extract energy from you, because you're not going to give away your energy anymore. Because the energy they extract from you is that emotional energy of stimulation. And when you refuse to feed people stimulation anymore, who wants to eat stimulation energy? Vampires. That's right. Because if you're actually here as clear consciousness, you don't eat that shit. You eat pure light. And all true beings eat pure light. The only beings that eat the stimulation and the inertia are vampires. It's not, you don't really eat the inertia. I mean, you can try to nibble on it, but it's too fucking hard. It's the stimulation that gets eaten. That's what an energy vampire is. They eat that stimulation energy. The anger, the lust, the greed, the wrath, that's the procrastination, all of that. That's what the vampires eat. So you're either here as a vampire,